Well, Joe Biden came up to speak, and everybody's excited, of course. And, Uncle Joe is your lovable uncle. You might not agree with him on everything, and from time to time at Thanksgiving, he might say some awkward things. Okay? And you're like, oh, there goes Uncle Joe again, right? But you like the guy, man. He seems like a regular guy, and in his speech, he talked about, his dad, who was an auto worker, and he said, look, the classic Biden, he's like, look, Governor Romney's not a bad guy. He does that all the time about his opponents. Not a bad guy. Everybody, come on. Okay. But as a guy whose dad worked in the auto industry, of course, ran an auto company, and my dad worked in the auto industry, man, my dad, he would have done anything to keep that industry alive. I would have done anything to keep that industry alive. How could you say let him go bankrupt? That was a nice moment there, and it got you thinking about his dad, and his dad was a totally regular guy, etc., and did work in that industry, etc. So, look, there were some nice moments. But overall, I have to keep it real with you, I thought the speech was a little disappointing. Like, for example, Bill Clinton came out last night and gave exact numbers about Democrats and Republicans and what kind of jobs they do on the deficit, on jobs, unemployment, etc., and I thought he knocked it out of the park. Here with Biden, he kept emphasizing how brave and courageous President Obama was. I know that it's his job as the vice president to overly brag for the president, so because the president doesn't want to seem like a braggart, he's got to do it in a very subtle way, right? Whereas the vice president doesn't have to be subtle, saying, hey, look at what a great job the president did, right? But I think he takes it over the top. The whole steely courage stuff, we saw Obama during the negotiations. I mean, it doesn't quite match up with the facts. Here he is talking about President Obama and the gutsy decisions he made after the economic collapse.
That one false move could bring a run on the banks or a credit collapse to put another several million people out of work. America and the world needed a strong president with a steady hand and with the judgment and vision to see us through. Day after day, night after night, I sat beside him as he made one gutsy decision after the other to stop the slide and reverse it.
Yeah, not buying it. I know what those decisions were, and they were to give more and more to the banks. Not very bold. Oh, you know what? I'm going to give a little bit more to Bank of America. What a spine of steel. Really? You're going to give more to JP Morgan? Oh, man, you are courageous. No, not buying it. It's just not the correct narrative of what happened. So I know his job is not to give the correct narrative. It's to do, to pump up their side. But there's an effective way to do it, and this is not it because it just doesn't ring true, if you ask me. Now, look, on the other hand, when he talked about the jobs that were saved or created, and they did create over 4.5 million jobs after the recession ended, right? After the Republican recession, the Republican-created recession ended. That's real, right? And he talked about how having a job is not just about money, that it gives you dignity and respect. And that was a good part of this speech. Now, speaking of which, he also talked about tax cuts for millionaires, and I like this part too. Let's watch.
To reduce the national debt. They were not for any of them. Why? Because they're not prepared to do anything about the debt if it contained even $1, I'm not exaggerating, even $1 or 1 cent in new taxes for millionaires. Folks, that's not courage, and that's not fair. Look.
Now, I really like that line because in Washington, D.C., if you say, hey, you know what, I'm going to cut Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid, they're like, oh, that is so bold. You are so brave. But that's not brave. They say, oh, and you know what, I'm going to give another tax cut to the rich. Oh, that is so brave. That's not brave. That's easy. Giving another tax cut to the most powerful people in the country is the exact opposite of brave. So the fact that he pointed that out in the speech is a good thing. Then he turned to foreign policy. And again, some highlights, some lowlights here, but here I like the last line. No question about that. Let's watch.
And he listened to the risks and reservations about the raid. He asked again the tough questions. He listened to the doubts that were expressed. But when Admiral McCraven looked him in the eye and said, sir, we can get this job done, I sit next to him and looked at your husband, and And I knew at that moment he had made his decision. And his response was decisive. He said, "Do it," and justice was done.
Look, you know I'm corny. I like the line about justice was done, right? Because I always talk about how we got to bring these guys to justice. Now, the rest of it, it's a mixed bag. You know, if one of the generals looked at me in the eye and said, "We can get bin Laden, should we do it?" I'd be like, of course! What spine of steel does it take to say that? Now, look, at the same time, amazingly, the Republicans said we shouldn't do it, which I'm blown away by. And it's literal. Remember, George W. Bush said, when asked about bin Laden, "I'm not that concerned about him," okay? And he spent no resources trying to get him. In fact, he diverted resources from Afghanistan when we had him cornered in Tora Bora and brought our troops to Iraq. When Mitt Romney was asked about it, and Biden quoted him on this, he said, I'm not going to move heaven and earth to get him. I can't believe politicians would say that. That is so dumb. It's such a wrong strategy. McCain and Romney both said it was naive of President Obama to say that he would go into Pakistan to get bin Laden without Pakistan's permission. Oh, well, they're the only people in America who were wrong about this. I think almost every other American would be like, oh, we got to go into Pakistan without asking them to get bin Laden? I'm pushing that button every time. Now, look, there were political risks involved in this. If the mission had gone wrong, he would have been perceived like Jimmy Carter was with Iran hostages when their rescue mission went wrong. I get that. But, you know, and of course, the real risk is to the guys doing the mission because they might lose their lives. It's not just the political risk. But overall, I think it's, I don't know if it's fair to say it's a no-brainer, but it's pretty close. And to me, I've always thought the very best missions are when we use the Navy SEAL guys. Because drones can make a mistake. Overall wars are disastrous. You send in SEAL Team 6, and I have high confidence they're going to get the job done and that it's the right way to do it and that we can identify them. So it was a good decision that apparently the Republicans wouldn't have made, which is unbelievable, right? He made the right decision, but the way that they hype it up like, oh my God, he looked at the general in the eye and said, "Do the most obvious thing in the world." Like, okay, all right, bring it down, right? So now more on that.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you what I think you already know, but I watch it up close. Bravery resides in the heart of Barack Obama, and time again, I witnessed him summon it. This man has courage in his soul, compassion in his heart, and a spine of steel. And because of all the actions he took, because of the calls he made, because of the determination of American workers and the unparalleled bravery of our special forces, we can now proudly say what you've heard me say the last 6 months. Osama bin Laden is dead and General Motors is alive.
I've been watching this president for 4 years, and there's a lot of positive things to say about him. Courage in his heart, spine of steel. Did anybody watch any negotiations he had with the Republicans? I mean, killing bin Laden is, politically speaking, not that difficult a decision to make. Saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to draw the line with Boehner. I'm going to take a real political risk, whether we're going to get a bargain or we're not going to get a bargain. How much tax cuts, Social Security cuts, etc. Those are real political risks. And when he got into those negotiations, I didn't see a lot of spine of steel there. That's keeping it real. So I'm not buying what Biden is selling there. Now the flip side is that last line that he's been using, as he said for the last 6 months, is true, and it is a pretty effective line. Osama bin Laden is dead. General Motors is alive. On that alone, you look and you go, well, that's a pretty good case. What does Romney have instead? He said, let Detroit go bankrupt and don't move heaven and earth to get bin Laden. So when you compare him to Romney, I mean, you want to talk about a no-brainer? That's it.